Good day, everyone, and welcome into the Football Guys Power Grid. Week 4, I am your host, Cecil Lammy, joined by the best and brightest minds in fantasy football, including Jeff Pasquino, of course, Austin Lee, Devin Knotts, John Lee, and special guest Ryan Hester. Ryan, welcome to the show. Good to have a fellow Steelers fan join me.
That's right. Thanks for having me, guys. It's tough footsteps to follow in after David Dodds and Moral Tremblay, but I will do absolutely everything I can.
Well, we're going to jump into some news and notes across the National Football League. And, Devin, I'm going to start with you because we're getting breaking news right now as we record this show on Thursday about Josh Gordon walking away. Now, it's not season long. It's DFS here on a Power Grid. But, I mean, does this give you that much more confidence in your guy, Terrell Pryor, who blew it up last week? Cody Kessler be damned. Now Pryor going forward, and this week specifically, can you go back to him?
I think you almost have to, because he's a guy who, especially on sites that haven't really raised his price yet, he's a guy who took 14 snaps at the quarterback position. He saw 14 targets last week. He's going to be one of the most utilized wide receivers in the league, and at a quarterback position, getting those guaranteed points, running the ball, throwing the ball, and then catching the ball at the volume that he has. He is Cleveland's only option in the passing game with Corey Coleman hurt, and then the trouble that they have at all the other positions on that team. At the quarterback position, they're down to Cody Kessler. Rookie quarterbacks have locked on to receivers in the past, and I think that's what we're seeing here.
Well, we'll definitely see how things shake out going forward. Does anyone have any doubts about Terrell Pryor? Something that, we saw last week. Are we all on board with Pryor? Because it seems like Austin and John. So, Austin, let's start with you. John, chime in after that. Why no on Terrell Pryor?
I think the important thing to note is that his price is especially high on FanDuel, and it's especially low on DraftKings. So if you're going to play him, look at DraftKings to play him. You can find information like that in our evaluator tool that we have at Footballguys that compares cross-site pricing. So with him, it's especially extreme, I feel like.
He's absolutely right. There's $7,000, I believe, on FanDuel, which is entirely too much for a team with an implied point total of less than 20 points. But on DraftKings, he's about 4,200 or thereabouts. I do believe that he's going to see a whole lot of Josh Norman in this matchup. And even though Odell Beckham beat him soundly last week, he's going to get so much volume that I think he still merits consideration in full PPR format at DraftKings at about 4K.
Well, as we continue with the news section, there's a superstar wide receiver in Dallas that now has a knee injury. And Jeff Pasquino, how much confidence do you have that, one, Des Bryant will play, because it seems like they're pushing him to play, but if he doesn't, is it automatically everyone must start Cole Beasley because he's going to get everything?
Yeah, I think Cole Beasley's definitely the play no matter what. And I think if Dez does play, he'll probably be more of a decoy. I personally think the game's going to be more of a run establishment. I think I love Zeke Elliott in that game. I think him and Cole Beasley would be dominating touches. We saw what the pace of play does against San Francisco, and how Seattle just dictated that. And, what Christine Michael did to them last week, I expect Zeke Elliott to do that, plus more. Plus, he didn't find the end zone last week. But Cole Beasley's the possession receiver. I would have lots of confidence putting him in. He's cheap. He's 5,200 in FanDuel. He's 3,900 on DraftKings. They're both cheap plays. They're must starts, I think, if Dez is out, and probably even if he is, because he's going to see so many targets.
Does anyone have a punt play on Terrence Williams? I mean, if Bryant doesn't play, we've seen Terrence Williams. They try to involve him, but as Devin says, he's not good at football. So does anyone out there, any greens on there on Terrence Williams? That would be a no. I think that's a no pretty much for everyone. Okay, well, let's move on. And as I said, Ryan joining the show, Steelers fan. We let the Eagles fan talk, Ryan, right? Pasquino got it out the way. The Battle of Pennsylvania was last week. His team's on a bye. But our team has the return of Le'Veon Bell. We can talk about the impact of Le'Veon Bell, but the impact on D'Angelo Williams and what happens therein. What are your thoughts here, Ryan? Because I think Williams can still get used enough on a team that lacks weapons. Listen, Antonio Brown's the best receiver in the game, but Marcus Wheaton can't play. Sammy Coates, if you get points for drops, he's your man. Darius Hayward-Bay is a slappy. I mean, you have Bell and Brown, and then what? I would like to see Williams used enough to have consideration, especially in DFS when everyone's going to be so excited about Bell.
I would too, Cease. I mean, there's kind of two lines of thinking here. The Steeler fan in me would love to see D'Angelo Williams continue to be used. Le'Veon Bell has had his last 2 seasons shortened by injury. Hate to have that happen again, especially if the team's going to make a playoff run. DFS-wise, all the reports this week are that Bell's going to get all the run he can handle. That's what happened last year when he returned from suspension too. There's also reports saying he's going to line up at wide receiver. As you mentioned, the team doesn't have a lot of weapons. Wheaton would have beaten Coates in a points per drop league last week. The fan in me said that, the day Marcus Wheaton signs with another team might be the happiest day of my life, non-Super Bowl winning day of my Steeler fan life. So there are limited options, and Bell is versatile, and I'd love to see him used that way and love to see Williams on the field as the running back with Bell split out in the slot perhaps.
Uh-oh. Devin's waving the red flag. What's up, Dev? Come on, Browns fan. Come on.
Sorry to beat up on the guest, but you look at the games that Bell was healthy last year, and D'Angelo Williams only had 2.6 carries per game. It just this team likes to run through.
But was that with Martavis Bryant on the field as well? I mean, the reason why I use Williams, I just think of using your best athletes. And Williams is a top 3 athlete on that offense. I mean, last year, sure, you had Martavis Bryant and Antonio Brown, and that reduced Wheaton's role. You had Heath Miller. I mean, that was then. This is now. Devin, still agree, disagree?
I'll wait and see. I just don't think for DFS purposes it can be recommended. I think in actual football, they may still get him in the games, but for DFS purposes, I don't think he's going to get enough touches to merit consideration.
Now, Pasquino given the green sign, is that because you believe Williams could be like a punt play?
I think both those guys are in play because Kansas City's been very strong against quarterbacks. They actually have the worst opposing quarterback rating. They're number 1 against quarterbacks all year long. Granted, Ryan Fitzpatrick helped a lot with 6 picks last week, but Kansas City can stop the pass. And if Ben struggles because we know there aren't many targets, I could see both those guys getting lots of touches. I don't see any reason why Pittsburgh doesn't run the ball 40 times this week. And then that will look well for both.
And Austin, you had the green Black-Eyed Joe up as well. You had the green sign. You weren't agreeing with Devin, though, right? You were agreeing with me, basically, and Ryan.
No, I'm taking Devin's side on this.
Oh, my God.
You can't play D'Angelo Williams at all until you see him used that way. They're going to ride Le'Veon Bell like crazy. They're going to ride him right out the gate, and I'm okay with playing him this week in DFS despite his high price.
I'm saying line D'Angelo up as a slot receiver because you don't have any weapons outside of Brown and Bell. Let's move on from that as we'll get into something with John at Tip and Pick on Twitter. John, the Giants running back situation is going to be different. You're going to see no Rashad Jennings, of course, Shane Vereen down, Jennings out, which is weird because he said last week I could have played, but they chose to and so you felt maybe he'd play this week anyway. So fans looking for cheaper running backs options, there's Bobby Rainey, a little bit more proven. I've never been a Rainey fan. And then you have Orleans Darkwa, who's kind of the larger back, the power back, if you will. But Rainey's the electric change of pace guy. It seems like they're going to split. Is there a preference here? Are you avoiding the Giants running back situation altogether, even if you're looking for cheap running backs?
Yeah, this is a pretty easy question to answer. It's they're going up against the Minnesota Vikings, who have looked really good on all facets, all stages of the defense this year. The Vikings are currently ranked anywhere from 6th to 8th in terms of rush defense. They're only allowing 3.5 yards per carry, less than 100 yards per game, and only a pair of touchdowns all season on the ground. And then if you add into that the fact that these carries are going to be split across different individuals, with Darkwa getting those high value goal line carries, and Rainey getting some of the third down work, and just there's just not enough to go around here, even at those lower prices. And the matchup is something I want to stay away from. So I think this is a total fade for me. Really, the only thing I'd be looking at on this entire slate is going with maybe Odell Beckham in a situation where I think he'll be low owned against a defense that everybody's afraid of right now. And because he's high priced, I think he'll be a good GPP option.
I just wish we got points for how many times we're going to see sad Eli Manning face. because all apologies to Peyton if he's watching, but your brother sometimes looks like he's constipated on the football field. We're going through news and injury notes, and let's do this, Austin. I want to talk about Hunter Henry because everyone's looking at the San Diego, New Orleans, Drew Brees going back, perhaps his final game in San Diego most likely. And no Antonio Gates on the flip side of that. It's the New Orleans defense, and there's a fine rule in fantasy, especially this year. Who are the Saints playing? Start everybody against them. How much confidence do you have in a Hunter Henry filling in for Antonio Gates, Austin?
I think he's a fine play. There's a lot of low-priced tight ends to choose from this week, I feel like, and he's not necessarily the top guy on my list. And it's also because I like so many other San Diego players, and I don't want to load up my cash game rosters with tons of San Diego. So, I look at New Orleans stats. They are terrible against the ground game, and they've only allowed 30 yards receiving or a touchdown to a tight end all season. They haven't allowed 30 yards or a touchdown to a tight end all season, and I think that's because people have been attacking them on the ground and finding other ways to take care of this defense. So Hunter Henry is a little lower on my list as far as cheap tight end plays go this week.
Well, looking at the Chargers, does anyone have punt play love for Dexter McCluster, a guy who did get a red zone target last week? Is there anybody that would think, I just need bottom of the barrel, somebody to sneak in? And that's no with everybody except John, who's questioning.
Not good at football.
That's a no.
That's a no.
Not good at football.
Don't try to bait me in here.
Yeah, well, I tried. You got to give me an A for effort. Let's look at the situation you got coming up here. Eric Decker and the shoulder thing. Brandon Marshall's been practicing, but he also has been a little bit banged up. So I'm going to toss this one back to you, Devin. When we look at the Jets situation and with this Decker shoulder, how much pause do you have in starting him? Does that lean you more towards Marshall? Where's Quincy Enunwa in this equation? Let's talk about these Jets receivers.
Yeah, it's a mess. Quincy Enunwa, I can't even pronounce it. Let's go with Quincy, is intriguing. But this Jets team, how do you trust Ryan Fitzpatrick? Where's his head at after throwing 6 interceptions last week in a tough matchup? I just can't trust anyone in this game.
Okay, well then we'll move on from that. I think that in this that we're going to get to Vegas in a little bit, but there's a lot better games out there than to look at this one. I want to know how Houston is going to respond mentally without J.J. Watt. So let's get into this one. Who wants to go on this one? Because we could spend a lot of time with this because I think it's more of a psychological standpoint, how the Houston Texans respond without J.J. Watt, how their defense performs without J.J. Watt. Ryan, I'll toss it to you. Will we see Houston kind of rally around and their offense do more? DeAndre Hopkins had the quote, which I thought was really interesting about Brock Osweiler, he's doing as good as he can. Translation, he's not really good. So what will we see from Houston? Will they rally around this? Can they? Will they be distraught or decimated by the loss of J.J. Watt?
Well, another way to translate that Hopkins quote is he could be doing better, I guess, right? So, but on the defensive side, he's the best defensive player in the game. Your Broncos, apologies to your Broncos, but Watt is up there, if not the best. And so it's clearly going to leave a hole. Looking at it just in the vein of this week, I think the team is still a good fantasy defense play. I think with Watt, they could absolutely crush Tennessee and hold Tennessee to even single-digit points. Tennessee may score now a couple of times, might make it a reasonable game, but Marcus Mariota's been a turnover machine this year. And he's just, the exotic smash mouth has been great for the running backs, not for him. So I still like Houston as a fantasy defense. Can't speak for the emotions of the players on the team and how it'll translate in real life other than to say I think they will take a step back in that vein.
It's a Football Guys Power Grid Week 4 here. You can also hear it on the Audible feed, footballguys.com podcast. You can watch it on YouTube, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. That is our YouTube channel, and we appreciate everyone for subscribing either to iTunes or to our YouTube channel. Does anyone like the London game? Can I get a red or a green on that? Like the London game and the London games, to me, it's like Thursday night football. I love football. I don't necessarily need to see Thursday night football. So does anyone like what you get from the London games, the early morning games, how it can affect the way that things play. We've got all green except for Austin, who's now turning as red as your sign. Austin, why like you or like me, do you not like the London game?
Well, I used to live in California, and on the West Coast, those games were brutal because they'd start at 6:30 in the morning. Like, who wants to wake up at 6:30 in the morning to start a game or to set a lineup or get injury news? I was waking up at 5:30 in the morning to get my London injury news so that my DFS rosters wouldn't be terrible. So I have this feeling for my West Coast brethren here. And the other thing, too, is I think it just messes with the DFS slates in a weird way. Like, I don't like the way that it sort of chops them apart in a funny way. And like, oh, if I want to play these guys, I have to play a special slate. So, I don't like it. And it's bad for the players that travel, even though they get the bye week afterwards. Like, I just don't think it's worth the travel. I don't like it.
Don't let Roger Goodell hear you say that because they want an international team. Pasquino, you had a green up that kind of surprised me.
Well, as far as this particular game, I like it, but I do agree with Austin about the early thing. Even at 9:30, it's kind of annoying unless you're like into the EPL or something. But there's not much for Sunday morning football that appeals. But as far as this particular game, I like the players in the game. I think that there's a good game here, and I think that it's going to be interesting because Jacksonville always plays the Colts tough. And here it is, Jacksonville, this is the fourth year in a row that they're going to London, whereas the Colts have never gone there before. So I think there's an advantage there for Jacksonville. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I agree, though, as far as a DFS standpoint and how it plays into the slates, it's kind of weird, and I don't like it. It's kind of like a Thursday night game, exactly just as you described. But from this week's standpoint, with the over-under well over 50, and I think there could be a lot of points, it could be entertaining, which usually does not happen for a London game. And the weather's supposed to be good, which usually doesn't happen either. So we could actually see an entertaining game, see a fantastic finish around 11:30 when you tune in and wake up.
Jags in London, watch Jags Twitter go nuts. It's because that's where they want them to be. John, this London game, messing with DFS players, messing with fantasy players, do you like it? And I wanted to ask you specifically, does Gus Bradley survive this? As I call him, Gas Bradley. I don't know if he smells, but Gus Bradley, does he survive this if they lose? Because I have a feeling like if they lose this game, and Jacksonville spent a lot of money. Malik Jackson's my dude. They spent a lot of money on him. It's not making any sort of difference with this team. Blake Bortles looks terrible. Like, I could see a scenario where they're like, Gus, take your own flight home.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I think that this could be a very unfortunate trip for Gus Bradley should they lose or should they not be competitive. They should be competitive against Indianapolis, who is getting healthier but still has some dinks, chinks in their armor, I guess, on defense. And the reason that I like this game is that the implied total is somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 to 27 points for each team. And it should be close, so they should be going after one another. I think you could rally up quite a few players in the passing game from this game. Now, the caveat there is what the other two guys already brought up, and that is that it's a 9 o'clock, so you're going to have to get on an early slate that isn't the prize pools won't be as high, and people who are playing that are also going to be playing intentionally. And they'll have a lot of the same overlap as you. So from a game strategy point of view, it's not as attractive unless you were to get in on a Thursday night. But since you're listening to us now, you're not going to hear that until tomorrow anyhow.
I want to wrap up the news and injury segment. And Devin and Ryan, I'm going to toss this one between you guys. I'm going to start with you, Devin. We talk a lot of college football, or we talk about college football prospects. And Jordan Howard with the Chicago Bears. I have a soft spot for Indiana backs going back to the days of Anthony Thompson or Von Dunbar or even Tevin Coleman, who I appreciated and I liked when he came out of Indiana just a few years ago. Now it's Jordan Howard and good friend of the program, Lance Zierlein, who does some of the best scouting work, NFL.com's, all his draft profiles. Those are all Lance Zierlein. I love Lance Zierlein, one of the best radio guys in the country, also one of the brightest minds for football. He had talked to some NFL scouts that said Jordan Howard That's going to make you mad, Devin, but stick with me. But there were some NFL scouts that believed that Jordan Howard was a better runner, not all-purpose back than Ezekiel Elliott, but he was a better runner than Elliott. We know Howard is talented. We know that he's powerful. We know that he's reminded some, including our very own Matt Waldman, of Stephen Davis. Stephen Davis with John Fox was a damn good thing. Damn good thing. But what is Jordan Howard going to be with John Fox now? Devin, you're up.
Yeah. The answer is I don't know, because what's surprising me is his ability to catch the ball. He's already caught 6 passes so far this year. You go back to college, and he only caught 11 passes total last year at Indiana and 24 in his career at UAB. So I don't know what it truly is. You look at his overall stats last week against Dallas, and he's 5 yards a carry, but he had a 36-yard carry. So do we throw that out? And the rest of his carries, he was 8 carries for 9 yards. So I'm probably not going to play him this week. I think long-term he has potential. And Detroit, the matchup against Detroit is good, but I just think that he's going to be popular. He's going to be extremely popular this week because his price hasn't adjusted. And ultimately, that 36-yard carry is scaring me a little bit, because he carries for 9 yards. If he doesn't break a long one, he may not produce. So,
Howard was the type of back to me in college. And again, I have a soft spot for Hoosier backs. I don't even know why. But he was the type of back where his first 10 carries weren't as good as his last 10 carries.
Yeah, that's fair. It's definitely a fair point. I just think there are better options this week. I like him as a long-term player. I just can't do it. I just can't do it.
Well, and Devin mentioned it, Ryan, as I toss this to you. Like, there's going to be a lot of people on Jordan Howard. Is that something you want to be a part of, or are you staying away from that?
I mean, in cash games, I think he's okay to play. It's cheap touches, right? So he's going to be the only guy. As Devin said, he showed some passing game acumen that was a little bit surprising. We didn't hear about that leading up to draft time and from between the draft and the season after the Bears took him. So that's nice. It kind of gives you a little bit of game script proof, attributes there. So it is super cheap touches. If you want to pay up and have like a Le'Veon Bell or an Antonio Brown in your lineup this week, you kind of have to use Howard just because you have to start 2 running backs at all the sites. Under those circumstances, I think he's okay, but by no means is he a must play.
It is the power grid, and we always go to Vegas, at least in our minds. But we want to look at Vegas and see what it tells us about DFS plays in Week 4. Let's go around the room and share all of your Vegas thoughts. John Lee, you are up with your thoughts on Vegas this week. What is Vegas telling you?
Okay, so one thing I noticed last week was that the Arizona-Buffalo game. Arizona came into Buffalo as a decent favorite, and there was a whole lot of action going on in Arizona, and the line was actually moving in the opposite direction towards Buffalo. Call this reverse line movement, and generally what it means is there's smart money on the minority of bets. And Buffalo, lo and behold, they win that game outright and sends Arizona home with a 1-2 record. This week we have 2 games. Cecil, I'm sorry to tell you that one of them is the Denver Broncos.
Now, I just cover the Broncos. I'm a Steelers fan, and on my Range Rover, John, as they call a Range Rover driver, I have a Steelers license plate for him, which I give crap about all the time. So I am attached to the Broncos, only the fact that I was I was just talking to Von Miller today. So
you and CJ are good friends. I'm sure you don't want to see him lose. Is that fair?
No. Yes, very fair.
Go down that road, right? Okay, so Denver, for example, is currently getting 80% of the bets coming into Vegas, and yet that line is not moving at all in the opposite direction. I think that bodes well for Charles Sims this week. I think he's a guy you could be looking at in GPPs because nobody will have him against Denver's defense. And, that implied team total there is 3 touchdowns, and I'm not sure that Mike Evans gets it against that secondary. And I like Charles Sims as an every down back there. We have a similar situation going on with Detroit and Chicago. 80% of the money coming in on Detroit, and yet That's not going anywhere. And I think that also bodes well for the aforementioned Jordan Howard, who I won't get into it because we've already spoken, but I do love him on DraftKings. I'll say that for the record.
All right, we'll continue on with Vegas. Pasquino, what is Sin City telling you?
Yeah, I agree with the consensus on Howard before I go on that. But as far as the team totals, Pittsburgh, Kansas City looks like a good game. I think that you're going to see a lot of that looks to be a tight one. I don't buy the line of being 5.5. I think it's going to be a lot closer. Like I mentioned earlier, that the Pittsburgh may struggle with the passing game. I think Kansas City's going to travel well with that defense. I think you're looking at a 27-24, 30-27 kind of contest. So I like that. When the over-under is floating at 47, it'll be a little bit higher than that. San Diego, New Orleans is the top game for the over-under. I think that's something you have to have a piece of in some way, shape, or form, especially against the Saints. That defense is just wretched. And the Atlanta-Carolina game, I think that the people are going to look at that game and see that it's first off, it's in a dome. It's 50 points, and there's a revenge factor for Carolina because Atlanta broke their unbeaten streak last year as the only blemish in the regular season. I think Cam Newton, if you can afford him, and I think you can this week, given all the value out there, he's probably the top quarterback in cash games and should be used for that reason. Carolina's
not having a problem with the win streak this year. Ryan, you're up about Vegas. And did you disagree? Am I sensing a disagreement here with Pittsburgh, KC, with Pasquino? What are your thoughts? What's Vegas telling you, Ryan?
Well, I agree and disagree, if that makes any sense at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. So let me explain then. So I agree with Jeff that the line, that tells us that the Pittsburgh team total is high. I agree that that was raised my eyebrows a little bit, right? So, and I also agree that I think the game is going to be closer than that line suggests. I actually think that this is the surprise shootout of the week, and I think that this game has a chance of scoring more points than San Diego and New Orleans. Actually, the disagreement with Jeff is the Kansas City against quarterbacks. They haven't really played a murderer's row yet. I think, Brock Osweiler, Ryan Fitzpatrick, among the guys that they've played, Phillip Rivers, who lost Keenan Allen at halftime in week 1. They're no Ben Roethlisberger, and they're definitely no Ben Roethlisberger at home, where he averages, I think, a handful more fantasy points at home over the last 2 years than he does on the road. The Steelers get Bell back. You can even throw a little narrative street in there if you'd like. But I think that, play the hits with the Steelers. They're going to score a lot of points. And I think that for GPPs, a little preview for later in the show, there's some Chiefs that I'm going to be on to.
Always playing the hits on Ass Crackin' Ball Sack. It's Bam in the AM. Oh, sorry. I get into radio mode and I can't get out of it. Austin, you're laughing at me. What's Vegas telling you this week, man?
I can't help it, man. I like your antics. I agree with a lot of things that have been said. One of the games that has not been mentioned yet is the Redskins Cleveland Browns game. Washington has a 27-point implied total here, and I like the Redskins passing game in this game. And I think that Cleveland could put up enough of a fight to make someone like Terrell Pryor viable, like we talked about on cheaper sites. A team that you might consider playing ordinarily, but I don't think this is the week to play their offense, is the Seattle Seahawks. They're just traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast for that early game, kind of the trap that the Arizona Cardinals fell into last week. And it's projected to be a super low-scoring game. Seattle is a 2.5-point favorite, but they're only projected to score 21.25 points. That's crazy low for a team that's supposed to win. So I would avoid the Seahawks offense this week.
Devin, you're cleaning us up in Vegas. You like to clean up in Vegas. And I like to get dirty in Vegas. That's for a different show. But, Devin, what is Vegas telling you?
Yeah, I like Kirk Cousins a lot in that Washington game. In games that it's 7, they won last year that they won by 7 points or more. He threw 16 touchdowns in 5 games. The other game that I'm looking at is the Bears versus the Lions. Total's 48 points, but yet the Bears are only 3-point underdogs in this game. So that's telling me that Vegas thinks that the Bears can keep this game close, and it's going to be a potential high-scoring game. So Brian Hoyer is someone who's sneaky. He had a pretty good game last week. He threw for 317 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I've already said I'm not a huge believer in Jordan Howard. I think if Jordan Howard pays off, it'll be through the passing game. And and Brian Hoyer is cheap enough that you can basically build a lineup however you want.
Well, as we move on to position-by-position breakdown, we're going to talk about guys that are a little bit chalky, guys for cash games, guys in GPP, and players that you should fade. We're going to try to hit all the top narratives and pick through this position, which we start with quarterback. And Austin, I'm going to start with you. For quarterbacks, chalky, cash, GPP, fade, and we had brought up the Carolina offense. Are you willing to pay up for Cam Newton in a potential bounce-back game against Atlanta? Let's talk about that and any other quarterbacks you like, Austin.
Yeah, I think there's enough value around the sites this week that I will have some exposure to Cam Newton. He's probably the third on my list for cash games, but he will be a guy I have a decent amount of exposure to. Like Devin mentioned, I really like Kirk Cousins this week. I'm also on Phillip Rivers this week against New Orleans. Those are my cash game quarterbacks of the week.
John, you're up with quarterbacks, and I'm going to put you on the spot. Breeze or Rivers? You can only have one. Who is it, and who are other quarterbacks that you like?
Breeze or Rivers? I think I'm going with Rivers there. New Orleans' entire defense is so bad that I think I've got to have Rivers, and they are favored to win that. They're the highest implied team total on the week at 28.5 points. So I think Rivers is certainly a guy that you want to be looking at, and he's cheaper for the record than Breeze. So he gets the double bonus there. So I'm big on Cam this week. I won't say why, other than that he's just the man, and he's got a great matchup against Atlanta, who traditionally he scores quite a few points against Atlanta. I think over the course of his career, he's played 7 games. And using FanDuel scoring, he's averaging 27 points per game. So that's good enough for me to make that investment in him. But as far as a GPP candidates, a guy that I'll be looking at this week is not your boy, I guess, Trevor Siemian against Tampa Bay.
No, in fact, he got snarky with me when I talked to him yesterday because on his passing chart for 3 weeks, a heavy majority, probably 70 to 75% of his targets are on the left side of the field. So I asked him, is that unusual because you're right-handed? And also, will defenses adjust to that? And he answered, and then he said, I'll throw some more passes on the right for you, Cecil. So, yeah, Siemian and I are not boys.
Yeah, I saw that tweet. That's why I was baiting you there to see if you would take it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, I think that maybe he throws to the right-hand side this week against Tampa Bay's secondary. Tampa Bay, the one thing about them, and this has actually been true for last year and this year, is that they are pretty strong against the rush. This year, they're only allowing 3.5 yards per carry. And opposing quarterbacks, the rating so far this year is 106.4. They've allowed 7 touchdowns versus only 1 interception. All the pieces fit. I think, if Kubiak's smart, he tries to attack this team where he can, build some momentum off of that big week last week with Siemian. And this is a great spot for him at what I think is a great value play.
Ryan, I'm going to toss it to you real easy. Is Carson Palmer done?
No, I mean, does he look like the last year version?
That wasn't exactly the sound of great confidence. Is he done? No.
He's not last year's version of himself, but he still has some great weapons on his team and a great head coach that'll allow him to use them pretty well. So he's not done, but he's on the decline. How about that?
Is anyone saying he's done? Do any of us believe that he's done and you should not invest in Arizona? Or are we all green lighting Carson Palmer? Or is it more of a wait and see?
I think you take it on a game-by-game basis is how you deal with him this year. I think he'll beat up on bad defenses, and I think he'll struggle against good defenses.
Yep. Okay, there we have it. All nods in agreement. Let's move to the running back position as we go position by position, talking chalk, cash, GPP, and fade. Sometimes English is difficult for me, Devin, but let's talk about this. Melvin Gordon against New Orleans. Is he going to be in every single one of your lineups?
Yeah, he's a guy I'm starting with. Just go ahead and click on him. The Saints are just awful against the run. As we saw last week, where Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman were 2 of the top fantasy backs last week. Whether whether it's the opponents just don't want Drew Brees on the field or they just want to control clock, they are running the ball at will against this New Orleans Saints defense, and I don't expect it to stop this week. So Melvin Gordon's price is creeping up there, but I think it's still in a price where you can afford him pretty easily. So he's a guy that I'm going to be building a lot of lineups around.
Besides Gordon, anybody else you're thinking about this week, Devin?
Yeah, I think, you have to consider Le'Veon Bell just because in his return, especially on PPR sites, he catches such a high volume of passes. The other guy's Ezekiel Elliott, just because his volume right now, he touched the ball 32 times last week, and we saw what Christian Michael last week was able to do against the 49ers. So I expect a big game from Elliott this week.
Well, Pasquino, you're up talking running backs here. Are anyone that stands out to you? And we've talked about the Atlanta side, and of course just brought up Tevin Coleman a couple of times on this show. But that split continues for both Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. It's Carolina who's got their own front seven that can get after you. Are you trusting any one of those two? And what running backs do you like in week 4?
Well, the beauty of DFS is that every week is a new week. So I'm not touching Atlanta this week against Carolina. There's just too much value, too much better plays are out there. Zeke and Gordon are my top 2 guys. I would put Le'Veon next. I think David Johnson's got to be in play. I think he's going to be under-owned. I think Howard on PPR sites and places he's cheap, like DraftKings, he's there. And the one guy I'm not seeing mentioned too much is a nice tournament play, just because all these other guys are going to be so popular. Spencer Ware. I think Spencer Ware, the game script is going to look very good for him against the Pittsburgh Steelers. We saw what the Eagles did. We saw what Sproles did on that big play. I see Spencer Ware having that potential again this week. So that's one sleeper that I kind of have on my list.
Yeah, Ryan, you're giving the green thumbs up there on the Spencer Ware talk. I think it's because people are expecting Jamal Charles back, but Casey's got a bye coming up. So just let him rest through the bye and let Ware keep hammering it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the Steelers have given up 100 yards receiving to running backs in 2 straight games and a touchdown to each of those guys with Sproles, as Jeff mentioned, and back to Gio Bernard in week 2. And they've allowed 21 receptions to running backs this year, which is tied for 3rd most in the league. So you cannot run on them, but you can pass on them, especially to running backs and tight ends. They tend to play zone this year. They play deep, not a lot of pressure on the QB, a lot of run after catch, et cetera, et cetera. Makes Ware a great play.
Are there any other running backs we're missing, fellas? Austin, John, Devin, anybody want to chime in with more running backs? Or is that pretty much it, like the top guys we're talking about, and even just a couple sleepers that maybe are overlooked?
I'll throw in a sleeper. I'll go with Carlos Hyde this week against Dallas. Dallas is allowing 5 yards per game. 5 yards per carry. They're allowing a lot more than 5 yards per game. As a Dallas Cowboys fan, they play down to their competition traditionally. And they're going on the roads to San Francisco, where we know that San Francisco is going to run a lot of plays in this Chip Kelly offense. And with 5 yards per carry, we look at who Dallas has faced. They faced the Giants, the Redskins, and the Bears, none of whom I would consider to have power rushing games, and yet they're still allowing massive yards on the ground. I think this is a good spot for Hyde, getting a lot of carries as a GPP option. Nobody will have him.
If Gabbert gets benched, though, John, what is the impact on Hyde?
I'm not a big fan of Colin Kaepernick, so it's really tough to say, but I don't know that he'll get benched here. I just don't see – I think this is a close game. Unfortunately, as a Cowboys fan, I'd like to see them win this game, but I am not 100% confident that they do.
I got one more. I'm going to throw DeMarco Murray in there. With the loss of J.J. Watt, I think that we saw what LeGarrette Blount was able to do last week against this Houston defense and the loss of Watt, which the offensive line typically puts a lot of emphasis on stopping J.J. Watt. I think DeMarco Murray could be a little bit sneaky. People are going to look at Houston's overall stats. I think that the Houston defense is impacted more by the Watt injury than people give credit for.
I got one more to throw out there, which is LeGarrette Blount. I think New England is looking to get to 4-0. They don't have a quarterback. they're just going to grind it out with the Garrett Blount against Buffalo, who's given up big games to David Johnson and Matt Forte. I think that's a good play that not many people are going to be on. But this is the 1 week you can still rely on Blount comfortably in the game script because Tom Brady's not back for one more week.
And Deion Lewis isn't back anytime soon. So keep going with Blount there. Let's move on to wide receivers. Ryan, you're going to kick off this wide receiver section, and we're going to have a conversation about Marvin Jones. And whether he's or not, he's still worth his price point. Is he still cheap enough to put in your lineups? Do you have trust in Marvin Jones? And are there any of the wide receivers, cash, GPP, or otherwise, that you like in week 4?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Marvin Jones. I liked him before the year and season long. I've got him on some of my teams. So last week was fantastic. He's still the number 1 targeted receiver on a pass-heavy team. To me, that's an asset that I like. His price went up. It's still not among the elite tier of receivers, and his production has been. I don't think – 2 touchdowns is a strong game for any receiver, but I don't think last week was a fluke necessarily or too much of one to a high degree. So I think Jones is still a good play this week. And, along with the other guys I like the most are Antonio Brown, of course, who is just Mr. Reliable, especially at home. And in cash games, I also like the San Diego duo, particularly Tyrell Williams on DraftKings because the price gap between the two is even bigger. So he's even cheaper, and I think those two are about equal. And then just for tournaments before we turn it over to the other guys, I actually really like old man Steve Smith in Baltimore this week. There's some positive touchdown regression coming. And if you'll allow me a little shameless self-promotion, my weekly column, Trend Spotting, I'm going to add this feature this week of targets become touchdowns. Working title, of course. But there's 5 players in the NFL getting at least 7 targets a game who have at least a 20% target market share on their team. And their teams have thrown at least 111 passes, which is top 12 passing attempts in the league. There's 5 of those players. Baltimore has 2 of them in Steve Smith and Dennis Pitta. Steve Smith gets DJ Hayden for Oakland on most of his routes out of the slot this week. He's a terrible corner, and the regression could be coming. So just something to keep an eye on. He's super cheap everywhere. He built some rapport with Flacco last week in the second half, had 11 targets, had his best game. So just something to keep in mind there with Steve Smith.
A lot of head nodding during that segment. And Ryan, there will be no shameless self-promotion. I personally don't allow it when I'm talking to C.J. Anderson in the Broncos locker room on Denver Sports Station, Sports Radio 104 through the Fan.
I wish I had more names to drop like you, though.
Austin, you were nodding in agreement on the Marvin Jones thing, so it seems like you're strong on that. What other wide receivers do you like in week 4?
I really like Emmanuel Sanders this week. I think that his price is still very affordable, and I like the way I see the game script growing. I agree with John's earlier analysis that Tampa Bay's run defense is stronger than their pass defense, and I see Emmanuel Sanders being a big beneficiary of that.
John, it looks like you want to say something about wide receivers. Like you got a guy right on the tip of your tongue.
I always want to talk. I'll give you some GPP plays because the cash game players that these guys have mentioned, I agree with. There's a couple guys I'll be looking at this week. I think I just look at Devin and abashedly bring up his name, but Ted Ginn this week as he breaks out the Panthers helmet.
Signed by Ted Ginn.
Yeah, I think Ted Ginn is a really sneaky play this week. He's low priced. We know his hands aren't great, but this is a spot with Carolina. They had the second highest implied team total on the week at 27 points, and we saw what happened last week with Minnesota. What happened there? Minnesota basically went on record and said they didn't care about Devin Funchess. If Devin Funchess beat them, they were going to let that happen. And so they keyed in on Kelvin Benjamin, who didn't even have a target. I think we'll see a similar game plan this week with Desmond Trufant. If he doesn't shadow Kelvin Benjamin, I think that he'll be on him quite often, which should lead Ted Ginn to go up against Robert Alford, who this year has given up 14 receptions and 20 targets his way with a pair of touchdowns. He's one of the lower-ranked coverage corners in the league. And Ted Ginn being a low-priced guy, I think that GPPs, you should definitely be looking at him. One other guy, believe it or not, this is tough to say, but Jamison Crowder is a guy that I'll be looking at this week. He continues to be highly targeted in that offense. I think that he's currently tied with Jordan Reed for 25 targets. That's the lead on that Redskins team. He's also leading the team in red zone looks in terms of receivers, of course, with 3. He's at 10, 8, and 7 targets over the past few weeks and touchdowns in the last few games. He'll go up against Tremont Williams, who in coverage this season has been thrown at 14 times, allowed 12 catches, and 3 of those have gone for touchdowns. So I think that Crowder's in a good spot to continue his hot ways on a Washington team that is the 3rd highest implied team total in the week.
Any wide receivers we missed? Pasquino, any punt plays, anything like that?
I really like the Houston wide receivers. I think that they have good matchups this week, and we're not talking much about them. I think that Nuke and Fuller are both going to get good games, and Osweiler is a sneaky GPP quarterback. I think you get an interesting stack there. Houston is chomping at the bit after not just being blown out, but being shut out by New England, and they're looking to take it out on Tennessee, who has only scored 16 points max in 3 games this year. I think Houston is going to have a very big game passing-wise and score a lot of points this week to compensate for the J.J. Watt issue.
The Watt issue will continue for them for the rest of the year. Let's talk tight ends as we move on here on the Power Grid. Affordable tight ends, including tight ends that we thought, okay, maybe there's nothing there with Coby Fleener, and then all of a sudden there was. We thought, hey, Jimmy Graham coming back from a patella tendon injury, that's major. He looked like a bad fit for Seattle's offense last year. Well, that was then. This is now. Fleener, Graham. Let's throw in Zach Miller, Hunter Henry, Cameron Brate as the Broncos struggle to stop opposing tight ends. Pasquino, I'm going to start with you on the tight end section. These cheaper options, so many of them. Which one to choose?
Well, it kind of comes down to either Hunter Henry or Zach Miller for me. Those are the 2 guys that I'm looking at. I think Henry they're both cheap. They're both under $5K for FanDuel there. Miller against Detroit. Detroit is horrendous against tight ends this year. They're giving up a lot of touchdowns, a lot of yards, and I think that we're looking at a possible shootout there. So, was it 5 there, Austin?
5 tight end touchdowns given up by Detroit this year, in 3 games.
Yeah, and we saw Zach Miller found the end zone twice last week, so I think that that they could definitely get him in the mix, and they definitely utilized him last week. Hunter Henry, he's cheap. He's going to try to make up for that bad fumble at the end of the game last week that he's probably kicking himself all week long about. I also, the Monday slate, I like Kyle Rudolph. I think that Sam Bradford's looking to him a lot. So those 3 guys plus Fleener, there's 4 guys under 6K, and if you happen to be playing on the Sunday morning slate, again, I agree with John that people that are playing that are probably trying to get Colts and Chargers or Colts and Jaguars in that game. So, but I do like Jack Doyle in that game. I think Jack Doyle is lesser known than Allen, but he's seeing more targets. He's probably the number 2 target in that offense right now. But there's so many good options under 6K that the only way to really differentiate this week, there's going to be ownership spread out. That's one thing. There's so many options. But the one way to differentiate is to pay up and go like a Greg Olsen and pair him with a Cam this week. But I do like the cheaper guys.
Okay, John, what does that mean?
I just want to talk. Did Jeff just talk for 3 minutes about tight ends and not bring up his lover, Dennis Pitta?
Oh, man.
Did he really?
Oh, man, you're going to have to send Pitta some flowers.
Well, they must have broke up because the picture's not behind him anymore. Come on, Jeff. That picture should follow you wherever you go. I want it in your car. I want you to have an actual mannequin that you can put a Ravens helmet on, so when you get pulled over by the police, say, "I'm sorry, officer, but my lover, Dennis Pitta, wanted to ride shotgun."
The life size cutout is on back order, so we're working on that.
Okay. Austin, you were a little bit not necessarily poo-pooing Hunter Henry, but you're like, there's so many other options. I mentioned Graham. I mentioned Fleener. Are those 2 that you would consider?
Miller's my top choice for the reason, 5 touchdowns that Detroit's given up. And then Fleener would be after that. San Diego's given up at least 65 yards to a tight end every week this season. So I see Fleener having a big game. It's not that I don't like Hunter Henry. It's just as I build my lineups and I'm putting Phillip Rivers in it and I'm putting Melvin Gordon in there and Travis Benjamin into my lineups, I'm not finding a whole lot of room for Hunter Henry because I don't want to, stack him with another San Diego player in my cash game lineups. So, he's sort of middle of the road in that bottom tier for me.
Devin, let's talk tight ends. What do you got this week?
Yeah, Dennis Pitta is my guy. I think we look at last year and the narrative was start your tight ends against Oakland. We've kind of fallen off that a little bit, but you look and they're still they're still top 10 in production against the tight end already this season. Both Jacob Tamme and Austin Hooper had huge games against Oakland earlier this season. I think that Pitta is in a really good spot this week, and he should produce. His price isn't too bad. The other guys I like, Greg Olsen, stepping up at the top. To John's point, I believe it was John who said that Kelvin Benjamin did not have a target until late in the game last week, or didn't have a target all game. Greg Olsen is a guy who they're in this high-scoring game in a dome. He's going to be under-owned, and I think that it's a sneaky play because not a lot of people are going to be paying up for a tight end.
Well, we get to kickers and defenses next, and I know that Pasquino always wants to talk kicker defense. John, you want to talk, but not in this segment. Ryan, any kickers or defenses? We'll start with the special guest, Ryan Hester. Any kicker or defense talk here?
Sure. Kicker talk, why not? A few kickers that are min price on FanDuel this week. You want to look for teams with high team totals, teams playing at home. Josh Lambo, Novak, and Hopkins for Washington are all min price, all fit the criteria of being a good kicker play. So they allow for us to spend a couple more thousand elsewhere as opposed to, paying up and being in the 5,000 range at kicker.
Devin, you're up with defense and kicker talk.
Yeah, Josh Lambo is my top guy. The other guy I really like it that if you have the money is Justin Tucker. Oakland has a history of giving up a lot of field goals. I've picked on them almost every week this year. And Justin Tucker's good. I mean, he's good from 60 almost every time. It seems like every time he kicks it, it's going in. So there's nothing worse than having a guy like Cody Parkey last week who kicked 5 field goals and missed 3 of them. So I like kickers that I can trust. I also like Adam Vinatieri in the Sunday morning game against Jacksonville. But those are the 3 that I'm targeting.
Pasquino, this is your segment. Kickers and defense.
Kickers are people too. These
No,
points,
they're not.
the points all matter. They all add up. They all can make or break your lineup. So I agree with some of these picks that we've made. But the thing about Tucker that I want to highlight is that that's a team that struggles with a run game. If you have a team that's going to struggle running and putting the ball in the end zone, that's going to lead or field goals. So I like teams that are home favored, have a lot of points, or in good weather. A couple guys that I'm looking at that weren't mentioned, Chandler Catanzaro for Arizona, a little bit more expensive at $4,900, but it yarded last week in Buffalo outdoors. So A, he's got a leg, and B, they're going to let him kick for distance. So the distance, 5, you get 5 plus, I think you get 5 points for a 50 plus yard or more on FanDuel. That's almost a touchdown. So that's definitely worth investigating. Look for those 50 plus yarders. They do matter. And also like Dan Bailey against San Francisco. I think that guy is another one that's 4,600. He's near minimum. Again, they're favored. The game script is positive for him. He's kicked a lot. I think he scores a lot as well. And one last thing on the kickers, because I know you guys love this segment. Kicker is a good place to look to hedge on a cash game lineup. So if you have an offensive player and say you're playing Ezekiel Elliott, if you pair him with Dan Bailey, you kind of hedge in case Zeke doesn't find the end zone and winds up a field goal. So you raise your overall floor of your lineup by hedging a little bit, by pairing your kicker with another offensive player on the same team in your lineup.
And if they score, all touchdowns count as 7 instead of 6. So that's a good point by Jeff.
So there you have it. Austin, anything on kickers defense, or like John and me, would you just like to move on?
I'm ready to move on. So the guys mentioned some great points.
Okay, well, let's get to stacks then. As we wrap up the show, we're going to talk about favorite stacks. Who is it? Stacks that everyone's going to have, stacks that no one's going to have, and stacks that you should have for your DFS lineup. And John, you kick us off with your stacks of the week.
Okay, I'll give you two, and I've kind of already mentioned these ones, but I like them enough to just drive them home at the end of the show. I think that Trevor Siemian with Manny Sanders is one that I'll be looking at in this defense against Tampa Bay, who is really tough against the run. I think this is a week where we continue to see Denver go through the path of least resistance, and Manny Sanders is cheaply priced across the industry compared to Demaryius Thomas, and Siemian, of course, continues to be fairly cheap. I think they go under-owned, and they're a nice stack to have that will be under-owned. The other one I think somebody else mentioned, but I'm going to steal it from them, and that is Brock Osweiler and DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins will go against Parrish Cox, who is the current worst-rated coverage corner in the entire league, and he should get at least half of his snaps against him. I think this is a game where we actually see the type of game that we saw last week with Marvin Jones, where he just buries this competition.
Devin Knott, stacks of the week.
Yeah, one of the stacks I really like this week is Matthew Stafford and Marvin Jones. The Bears defense as a whole is just decimated with injuries. The other stack I like is Kirk Cousins and Jordan Reed. I think that Jordan Reed is going to be very, very sneaky because no one is going to have him because of all the value that we've talked about earlier in the show. So those are the two that I'm really targeting. I'm looking for stacks. I'm not looking for the obvious, so I'm not looking for the Saints or the Chargers. There's really no value in a GPP for me to do it because they're going to be so highly owned. So I typically look at stacks that are kind of under the radar a little bit.
Would you triple stack with Crowder, Cousins, and Reed?
Sure. I mean, like I mentioned earlier in the show, when Kirk Cousins won by a touchdown or more last year, he threw for 16 touchdowns in 5 games. So, he's averaging more than 3 touchdowns, and they're going to have to go to somebody. So Reed, Crowder, and Cousins are a good triple stack. I don't typically like to triple stack, but it's a strategy that could pay off this week.
Ryan Hester is up, our special guest on this week's edition of the Power Grid, and you get to wrap us up with your stacks of the week.
Sure. One I mentioned earlier that let me correct myself with that touchdown regression stat. The guys that I mentioned earlier, the 5 guys, have 0 touchdowns, and then all the other target stats apply. More than 7 a game, 20% market share, and on high-volume passing team. So the stack still stands, though. Joe Flacco and Steve Smith. And one of the other 5 guys, as a matter of fact, in that category is Amari Cooper. So you could mini-game stack that game hoping for a shootout. Flacco, Smith, Cooper. You'd be pretty cheap. You'd be able to go high elsewhere. The other stack that I like is in the surprise shootout game I alluded to earlier, Kansas City and Pittsburgh. The Steelers and Chargers are the only 2 teams in the league to allow 300-yard passer in every game so far. Alex Smith isn't necessarily the best candidate to do it, but he did do it. He was one of the ones to do it against San Diego. So I like pairing him with Travis Kelce. Steelers aren't giving up huge points to the tight end, but they've faced committees of tight ends. The Bengals duo of Tyler Kroft and C.J. Uzomah, Brent Selleck and Trey Burton with Philly. They did give up 7 catches and 64 yards to Jordan Reed in week 1. So you could see a line like that for Kelce. Throw in a touchdown maybe. He's got big numbers. And if Smith throws 3, total one or 2 to Kelce, then you've got some huge points. So those 2 are my favorite sort of low-owned potential stacks this week.
Austin, you're up with your stacks of the week for week 4.
I think this is a week where Julio Jones is going to be very low owned. He's coming off of a bad game. There's lots of.
Is he healthy though? And when you watch him play, Austin, he just doesn't look right. Will you trust him because that price is still inflated?
The price is still inflated, and I think more people are going to be on Hopkins saving a little money or on Antonio Brown. But for a GPP, I'm willing to take a risk on that for his upside. And I think that if you pair him and Matt Ryan together against Carolina, you're going to end up with a lower owned stack than a lot of the other sort of high total Vegas games this week. I'm not saying that I'm over the moon about Julio, and I'm definitely not playing him in cash games. With that upside and the low ownership percentage, that's a pairing that I'll target in GPPs.
Well, I'll ask you, Austin, will you triple stack with Tammy?
No, I won't. I'm with Devin. I'm not a big fan of triple stacking, and if I do, I'm looking for like a complete and utter blowout where I'll pair a quarterback, a running back, a pass-catching running back, and a number one wide receiver more often than I'll pair two pass catchers with a quarterback.
Okay, Pasquino, your stacks of the week. By the way, punt play for you, Jeff. This was just for you and, of course, our viewers and our listeners. Tyreek Hill. If there's a Darren Sproles-like product or prospect on Kansas City, it's Tyreek Hill. There's your punt play. Put it down.
I'll mark that down for you. I don't know if that's this week, but I think it's a good
Well, look what the Steelers gave up to Darren Sproles. If there's an explosive player, and if we're talking about Alex Smith, maybe going 300 yards, a little dump off to Hill, take it to the house.
I still see Ware doing that more than Hill, but I get where you're coming from there. And I could, as far as triple stacks, I think that we're talking about that. For me, triple stack criteria, it really comes down to the price point. If I can get them for a 30 to 35% of the cost of my roster, and I can see a script where I'm going to get a GPP value for the three combined, then I'll do it. But I tend to favor more the complementary, the other team wide receiver. So what you said earlier about going in the Cooper versus Steve Smith, that sort of thing. I did a lot of the good ones were mentioned. Osweiler was one I was really looking at. Carson Palmer has been mentioned. I think that Arizona is going to have some revenge this week, and I think that you look to do it with David Johnson, catch a lot of passes, or Larry Fitzgerald, who is a touchdown machine. They love to give him the ball down the end zone, in the red zone, and get him the touchdowns. I think both those guys are going to be lower owned. And the nice thing about stacks this week is that there are a lot of stacks out there that are not on the cash game list. There are lots of good players you can go out there and say, let's stack around him, that won't be highly owned because there's so many other guys that are being targeted that are not going to be highly owned.
Before we wrap up the show, John, I want to toss this to you quickly because I got a note here from Adam Schefter that Darius Butler's not traveling to London. Does that make you more confident in – because we talked about that game, but we really didn't spend a lot of time with Bortles or Robinson or even Hearns, who's fallen out of favor with fantasy owners. Now you're going to be down, and the secondary is already terrible, now down a corner for the Colts. Does that change anything for Jacksonville, John?
I mean, not for me because I was already pretty high on them. I think that, Vontae Davis is as good as he is. He's a perennial All-Pro. He's actually not been very good this year in the limited time that he's played. I think this game could be a real shootout. So I don't have a problem with going with Allen Robinson or Allen Hearns against that secondary. And I think that if you're going to do that, especially in GPPs, you should probably game stack the whole thing. Just get as much exposure to it as you can, and make your roster as unique as you can with that game.
It is the Footballguys.com Power Grid, and Jeff Pasquino, tell our viewers and listeners why they need to check out Footballguys.com for all of their DFS needs.
Well, we have so much content. It's even hard for those of us who are on staff to ingest it all during the week. But there's this show. There's the Roto Grinders comparative show. There's the Audible podcasts. There's David Dodd's great content. Something from everybody on this show this week, and then some. We have over 20 writers. We have collaborative pieces for who should I start each week. We have roundtables that Ryan helps out with and does a great job orchestrating. And we also have 3 great articles that are just centered around the secondary sites for Yahoo Draft, Fantasy Draft, and Fantasy Aces. We have keystone pieces for those. So for the 5 major sites that we have identified this year, there's just so much content out there, and the interactive value charts that you can pretty much build any kind of roster you want out there very quickly. These are great tools. It's a must-have for anybody that plays DFS on a regular basis.
That's how we get it done. Footballguys.com. Many special thanks to our special guest, Ryan Hester. Hope you enjoyed being part of the show, buddy.
Absolutely. Be happy to do it anytime you guys would welcome me back. Thanks a lot.
For the fantastic Devin Knotts, always repping the Buckeyes, man. Never stop, never change. The amazing Ryan Hester, the spectacular John Lee, the stupendous Austin Lee, and the good old regular Jeff Pasquino. You're awesome in my eyes, buddy. I'm Cecil Lammy saying thank you very much for watching. Check out footballguys.com, and as always, stay frosty, people.
Yeah, I need to bet on that. Who's going to win?
I don't know. We never win.
I need to bet on that.